My own father shoved a heavy Mont Blanc pen into my hand so hard the metal bit into my knuckles. "Sign it, Zoe. We are not playing games today." I was sitting in a mahogany-paneled boardroom in downtown Chicago, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me. Instead, my mother stood over my left shoulder, tapping the glass of her Cartier watch, complaining about the traffic on Interstate 90. My sister's husband, Marcus, was pacing by the window, sweating through his custom suit. They wanted me to sign a blanket quitclaim deed, signing away my entire share of my late Aunt Beatrice's estate before the lawyer even opened his mouth. When I set the pen down and said no, my father grabbed my shoulder and whispered that he would strip me of my family name and leave me with nothing. What none of them realized as they cornered me in that room was that by refusing to sign that single piece of paper, I had just triggered a hidden federal audit that would expose their fraud and send 3 of them to federal prison. Before I reveal exactly how this trap snapped shut, let me know your age in the comments. Welcome to the QT Told Stories channel, where we expose toxic family secrets. Hit subscribe if you believe no one should be forced to buy their family's love. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The air conditioning in Harrison Thorne's law office hummed a low, steady drone that did nothing to cool the tension in the room. I am 33 years old, and I work as a financial risk analyst. My daily routine involves calculating exposure, identifying anomalies, and spotting the exact moment a bad investment is about to fold. I know what panic looks like. Richard, my father, leaned over the polished conference table, his jaw ticked. Diane, my mother, adjusted the collar of her cashmere blazer, filling the space around us with the suffocating scent of her Tom Ford perfume. It mixed with the sour, nervous sweat radiating from Marcus. "Just sign the document, darling." Diane offered a tight, closed-mouth smile. "It is a standard quitclaim, just a tax formality so we can get Beatrice's estate cleared. We have a dinner reservation in Oakbrook at 6. I looked at the thick stack of legal paper. You do not sign a quitclaim deed before the attorney reads the will. Aunt Beatrice was my father's estranged sister. She was a shrewd, guarded woman who trusted no one. She built a fortune in Chicago real estate and kept her affairs sealed until a sudden stroke took her 3 weeks ago. My family despised her, but they craved her money. I pushed the heavy pen an inch away from the contract. I need to hear the will first." Richard exhaled a sharp breath. He grabbed the back of my chair, pulling it dangerously close to him. "You are doing this right now, Zoe. You are not dragging this out. If you walk out of this room without signing, you are done. No more holidays. No more family support. You will be cut off." I kept my gaze steady on his reddening face. Then Mr. Thorne, the family estate attorney, cleared his throat. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose and placed his hand flat over the sealed manila envelope in the center of the table. "Richard," he said, his tone clipped, "perhaps we should pause." "She is signing it, Harrison," my father snapped. "She cannot," Thorne replied. He slid the envelope toward himself, breaking the wax seal with his thumb. "Because this is not the will." Diane stopped tapping her watch. Marcus flinched so hard his shoulder bumped the glass window. Thorne pulled a single crisp sheet of legal paper from the envelope. "Beatrice's actual will is locked in probate. She added a legally binding codicil 3 days before she passed. The dispersal of the estate is conditional. Conditional on what Richard demanded, his voice losing its arrogant edge." Thorne looked up, his eyes sweeping over my parents, then Marcus, before settling on me. "A mandatory 48-hour forensic audit of this family's collective financial accounts. It has already begun." The silence following Harrison Thorne's announcement lasted exactly 3 seconds before the room fractured. Richard slumped back into his leather chair. The flush of anger that had painted his neck a dark red vanished, leaving his skin an ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just been informed the parachute he packed was filled with silverware. Diane reacted differently. She lunged forward across the polished mahogany, her manicured fingers clawing at the crisp sheet of legal paper in Thorne's hands. "This is a gross violation of privacy," Diane shrilled. Her voice abandoned its usual country club purr, hitting a sharp, frantic pitch. "You cannot audit our personal accounts, Harrison. We are not the ones on trial here. My sister-in-law had no right to mandate such an invasive procedure." Thorne did not flinch. He calmly slid the paper out of her reach and folded it back into the manila envelope. "The audit is not a request, Diane. It is a legally binding stipulation of Beatrice's estate, and I am not the one conducting it." A third-party forensic accounting firm triggered the software sweeps the moment I broke this seal. The process is entirely automated and currently locking down read-only access to every tax return, bank statement, and shell company connected to the Mitchell family name. I sat perfectly still, watching the implosion. My profession trains me to separate standard frustration from genuine terror. A normal family reacting to a surprise audit might express annoyance at the inconvenience. My family looked like cornered animals. Richard stared blankly at the wall, his jaw slack. Marcus, the usually suave and charismatic entrepreneur, rubbed his temples so hard his skin turned raw. Then I noticed my younger sister, Chloe, sat at the far end of the table, shielded partially by a heavy oak credenza. She was the family golden child, 29 years old, draped in a designer maternity dress, carrying her first child and my parents' pride. Chloe had always been the polished center of our universe, but right now, Chloe was not looking at the lawyer. Her head was bowed, and her thumbs flew across her smartphone screen beneath the edge of the table. Her hands were shaking. Not a gentle tremble, but a violent, erratic vibration that caused her diamond engagement ring to clatter softly against her phone case. She hit send, bit her lower lip, and immediately started typing another frantic message. I looked from Chloe to Marcus. He pulled his phone from his breast pocket, checked the screen, and swallowed hard. The dynamic shifted in my mind. They were not angry about losing Beatrice's money. They were terrified of what the forensic accountants were going to find in their own ledgers. I stood up. The heavy wooden chair scraped loud against the hardwood floor, silencing the room. "Where are you going?" Richard demanded, his voice regaining a fraction of its former authority. "Sit down, Zoe. We need to coordinate a legal response to this overreach." I picked up my purse and slipped my phone into the side pocket. "I am leaving. You have 48 hours to prepare your defense for whatever it is you are hiding. I suggest you start now." I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy glass doors. Diane called my name, her tone dripping with manufactured injury. But Richard did not stop me. He was already leaning over the table, whispering fiercely to Thorne. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt eternal. The quiet hum of the descending cab did nothing to slow the racing of my pulse. I stepped out onto the bustling Chicago street, letting the humid afternoon air wash over me. The blare of traffic on Wacker Drive and the hurried footsteps of pedestrians usually brought me comfort, a reminder of the city's relentless forward motion. Today, the noise felt distant. My mind was already parsing data, assembling the pieces of the bizarre tableau I had just witnessed. Why force me to sign a quitclaim deed blind? A quitclaim relinquishes all rights to an estate, but in certain complex trusts, it can also signify the assumption of hidden liabilities. My parents did not just want me out of the picture. They needed me to assume a role. They needed a signature. I walked 3 blocks to a quiet coffee shop near the river, pulled out my laptop, and connected to the encrypted virtual private network I used for corporate risk assessments. I ordered a black coffee sitting in the corner booth, with my screen angled away from the windows. The barista set the mug down, but I ignored it. If a forensic audit was sweeping my family's financial history, I needed to know exactly what the algorithms were going to find, attached to my own name. I have spent a decade building an impenetrable financial fortress. My credit score hovered comfortably near perfect. I carried zero debt outside of a modest auto loan. My risk profile was pristine. I logged into my secured credit monitoring portal, bypassing the consumer-facing dashboards and accessing the deep, raw data files provided by the 3 major credit bureaus. The loading icon spun for 2 seconds. When the numbers populated on the screen, all the breath left my lungs. My chest tightened as if an invisible vice had clamped around my ribs. My credit score was not perfect. It was decimated. The number glaring back at me was so low it barely registered as solvent. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, assuming the encrypted connection had pulled a corrupted file. I refreshed the database. The brutal number remained. My pristine financial identity was in ruins. I placed my cold hands flat on the table and forced my eyes to read the itemized breakdown. This was not a stolen credit card used to buy electronics. This was systematic, calculated corporate identity theft. The red flags cascaded down the screen. 3 separate defaulted business loans issued by predatory subprime lenders. A second mortgage taken out against a commercial property I had never heard of. The total outstanding debt suffocating my Social Security number amounted to $450,000. The loans were not fresh. They had been maturing and defaulting over the past 14 months, bleeding penalty fees and compound interest. Someone had used my spotless background to secure nearly $500,000 in high-risk capital, and then deliberately let the accounts burn to the ground. I clicked on the origin documents for the largest defaulted loan, pulling up the digital footprint of the application. The funds had been routed to a corporate entity registered as Apex Elite Detailing, LLC. The registered address was a luxury commercial garage in the affluent suburb of Oak Brook. I stared at the name of the LLC. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening clarity. Apex Elite Detailing was not a stranger's company. It was the high-end custom auto shop owned and operated by Marcus Avery, my charismatic brother-in-law. Marcus had spent the last 2 years boasting at family dinners about his expanding enterprise, securing exclusive contracts to detail imported sports cars for Chicago's elite athletes and executives. Chloe had paraded his success around wearing designer clothes and upgrading her luxury SUV every 6 months. My parents had praised his entrepreneurial spirit, constantly comparing his lucrative business to my quiet corporate desk job. They lauded Marcus as a visionary. He was not a visionary. He was a parasite. He had built his entire facade of wealth by quietly siphoning capital through my stolen identity. But the betrayal cut deeper than Marcus alone. To secure a commercial mortgage and business loans of this magnitude using my identity, the lender would have required deep familial verification, tax records, and forged physical signatures. Marcus could not have executed this alone. He needed inside access to my birth certificates, my old tax forms stored at my parents' house, and my security verification questions. My father is a man who demands control over every piece of mail that enters his home. My mother treats our family secrets like currency. Chloe was texting Marcus under the table the moment the audit was announced. They all knew. They had all participated. The true purpose of the boardroom ambush crystallized in my mind, turning my blood to ice. The quitclaim deed my father had tried to force upon me wasn't just about stealing my inheritance from Aunt Beatrice. That was merely a bonus. The document contained broad indemnification clauses. If I had signed that paper to receive a meager payout from the estate, I would have legally absorbed all associated familial debts, assuming full legal responsibility for the LLCs tied to my name. They were not trying to cut me out of the family. They were trying to use the estate reading to trick me into legally validating the $450,000 of fraudulent debt shielding Marcus from federal wire fraud charges. My own parents were willing to destroy my future, bankrupt my life, and saddle me with a $500,000 anchor just to keep Chloe's husband out of a federal penitentiary. I closed the laptop. The quiet hum of the coffee shop faded into a low, static roar in my ears. I did not feel the urge to cry. The grief of losing my family had evaporated the moment I saw Marcus's name on those defaulted loans. What replaced it was a cold, surgical rage. They thought because I was the quiet, compliant daughter, I would fold under pressure and accept the ruin they designed for me. They severely underestimated what a risk analyst does to a bad investment. I picked up my keys and walked out the door. It was time to pay my brother-in-law a visit. The drive to the western suburbs took 40 minutes. I spent every mile listening to the rhythmic thump of my tires over the asphalt, processing the sheer scale of the deception. Oakbrook is an enclave built on manicured lawns and quiet wealth. It is a place where appearances are guarded more fiercely than bank vaults. Chloe and Marcus lived in a sprawling modern farmhouse design that looked like it belonged on the cover of an architectural magazine. Their life was a curated exhibit of success built on a foundation of lies. I pulled my practical corporate sedan up to the end of their long, winding driveway, parking just behind the shadow of a giant oak tree. Marcus was outside. He wore a designer polo shirt holding a microfiber cloth, meticulously wiping a non-existent smudge off the hood of his gleaming silver Mercedes-Benz. A luxury lease, I now realized, was funded entirely by my stolen identity. The rhythmic tick, tick, tick of the lawn sprinklers cutting arcs of water across the pristine grass provided a surreal, calming soundtrack to a moment that felt like a waking nightmare. The smell of expensive car wax hung heavy in the humid afternoon air. I did not say a word as I approached him. I gripped the thick stack of printed credit reports and loan defaults in my right hand. The edges of the paper dug sharply into my palm. When I reached the front of the vehicle, I slapped the documents directly onto the hood of his car. The pages fanned out, sliding slightly against the polished metal, reflecting the harsh afternoon sun. Marcus flinched, stepping back, as if the paper might ignite. His charming smile, the exact smile that had charmed my parents into funding his early ventures, faltered. He looked at the documents, then up at my face. The polished bravado melted for a fraction of a second, exposing the raw panic vibrating beneath his skin. "Zoe, what is this?" he asked. His voice adopted that smooth, placating tone he reserved for difficult clients and impatient investors. "You cannot just drop trash on the paint. I just had it detailed." "Trash," I countered, keeping my voice dead level. "Those are federal financial documents, Marcus. 3 subprime business loans and a second commercial mortgage totaling $450,000, all filed under my Social Security number, all routed directly to the operating accounts of Apex Elite Detailing." He stared at the top page where his limited liability company name was printed in bold black ink. The charming facade snapped back into place with practiced ease. He let out a rehearsed chuckle, shaking his head, as if I had just told a mild joke. "Zoe, you are overreacting." He reached out to gather the papers. "This is just a simple clerical error. My accountant mixed up the guarantor paperwork when we filed the expansion documents last year. I meant to tell you about the mix-up. It is nothing to worry about. Once Beatrice's estate clears the probate process, I am going to pay it all off in one lump sum. You will not lose a single cent. We are family." I stepped closer, forcing him to abandon his attempt to grab the papers. "A clerical error does not forge my signature 4 separate times, Marcus. A clerical error does not bypass biometric security protocols at a commercial lending firm. You stole my identity. You drained my credit to float your failing business and fund Chloe's country club lifestyle. I am going straight to the police station to file a federal identity theft report." Before Marcus could formulate another lie, the heavy oak front door of the farmhouse swung open. I expected Chloe to emerge, feigning ignorance and crying her usual crocodile tears. Instead, the heavy thud of leather dress shoes on the stone pathway announced a different adversary. My father stepped out onto the portico. Richard had beaten me here. Chloe must have called him the second I left the downtown boardroom. He did not look panicked anymore. He looked resolved. The cold, calculating glare he used to dismantle hostile witnesses in the courtroom was now laser-focused on his own daughter. Marcus immediately took a step back, literally hiding behind my father's shoulder. "You are not calling anyone Zoe," my father stated. His voice carried over the sound of the sprinklers, sharp and commanding. He marched down the walkway and stood between me and Marcus, creating a physical barricade to protect the thief who had ruined my life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway. I stared at the man who raised me. The reality of the situation settled into my bones like lead. "You knew," I said. My voice did not shake. "You knew he stole my identity." Richard crossed his arms over his chest. "He did what was necessary for this family. Your mother has a problem, Zoe." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Diane has been visiting the high-stakes tables at the Riverboat casinos for the last 6 years. She accumulated debts that required immediate liquidation of our assets to keep her out of jail and keep my law firm's reputation intact. All those charity weekend retreats she took were covers for her gambling binges. Our credit is ruined. Chloe and Marcus needed capital to keep the detailing business afloat and maintain their social standing. You had a pristine financial record, sitting there doing nothing. You are single. You have no dependents. It was the logical choice to use your profile." I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. My own father was justifying $500,000 of felony fraud as a practical family accounting measure. The audacity of his rationalization took my breath away. "You sacrificed my future to cover Mom's gambling addiction and Marcus's failed business. You let them steal my name. If you go to the authorities," Richard said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me, "I will destroy you." He let the threat hang in the air, mingling with the mist from the lawn sprinklers. "I have spent 30 years building connections in the Illinois judicial system. If you try to report Marcus, I will hire a team of litigators to bury you in civil suits. I will claim you were a silent partner in the business and orchestrated the loans yourself. I will tie up your bank accounts in injunctions. I will drag this out for decades until you cannot afford a cup of coffee, let alone a defense attorney. I will subpoena your employer and ensure you are fired for financial misconduct. You will be bankrupt, unemployable, and entirely alone." I looked up at the massive house. Chloe was standing in the second-story window, a dark silhouette behind the sheer white curtains, watching her father threaten me. I was entirely isolated. My family had not just betrayed me, they had formed a criminal syndicate against me. They viewed my independence as a resource to be harvested and my life as collateral damage in their desperate bid to maintain their wealthy facade. Arguing with a man willing to blackmail his own blood was a waste of breath. If I fought them on their terms in the open daylight, I would lose. Richard had the money, the legal prowess, and the sheer ruthlessness to make good on his threats. I needed leverage. I needed the one thing they were truly terrified of, the estate. Aunt Beatrice was a brilliant woman. She despised Richard and tolerated Diane. She triggered that automated forensic audit for a very specific reason. She left a trail, and she knew I would be the only one capable of following it. I turned my back on my father and Marcus, leaving the credit reports scattered across the hood of the leased Mercedes. I walked back to my car, the crunch of gravel under my shoes sounding abnormally loud. I knew exactly where I had to go before the 48-hour audit window closed. The old Victorian house in Evanston held the key to my survival, and I was going to tear it apart until I found it. The adrenaline from the confrontation in the driveway began to curdle into a cold, heavy dread as I steered my sedan northward toward the city limits. The afternoon sun beat down on the congested lanes of the interstate, but my hands gripping the leather steering wheel felt like ice. My father had laid his trap with surgical precision. He had weaponized the legal system, the very institution he swore to uphold, to ensure my compliance. He viewed my ruin not as a tragedy, but as a simple accounting adjustment necessary to balance his own ledger. I needed a countermeasure, and I needed it before the forensic sweep concluded in less than 2 days. My destination was the only place left that held any tactical advantage. I pulled into the brick-paved driveway of Aunt Beatrice's historic Victorian home in Evanston. Unlike the sprawling modern farmhouse Marcus and Chloe occupied, this residence possessed a quiet, formidable dignity. The dark green trim and weathered stone exterior stood as a testament to endurance rather than flash. Beatrice was not a woman who chased trends or sought the approval of country club socialites. She had accumulated her wealth through calculated investments, ironclad contracts, and ruthless patience. She had spent decades observing Richard's reckless spending and Diane's superficial obsessions, always maintaining a calculated distance from their toxic orbit. The heavy oak front door unlocked with a solid metallic clank. The interior air was stale, holding the quiet stillness of a tomb. I walked past the antique foyer table where she used to leave her mail and headed straight for the rear of the house. Beatrice favored me not out of familial obligation, but because we shared the same analytical disposition. We both understood that numbers rarely lied, even when people did. I knew she did not trigger a federal forensic audit on a whim. She left a map, and I just had to find the starting point. I entered her ground floor study. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes on real estate law, urban planning, and Chicago history. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the heavy velvet drapes, casting long, dusty shadows across the faded Persian rug. I stood in the center of the room, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. A risk analyst looks for anomalies, a break in a pattern, a discrepancy in the data. My gaze swept over the meticulously organized shelves, the pristine antique writing desk, and the framed artwork. Everything was aligned with mathematical precision, except for one item: a large framed map of 1920 Chicago, illustrating the original Burnham plan, hung on the far wall directly behind her tufted leather reading chair. The heavy brass frame tilted downward on the right side. It was a fraction of an inch out of plumb. For a woman who demanded perfection from her surroundings, that slight tilt was a glaring beacon. I crossed the room and placed my hands on the gilded edges of the frame. It swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a brushed steel wall safe embedded deep into the plaster. A digital keypad glowed faintly in the dim light, requiring a 6-digit sequence. I stared at the flashing green cursor. Beatrice despised predictability. She would never use a street address, a banking PIN, or a year of birth. I mentally cataloged every significant milestone in her life. She never married. She considered anniversaries trivial. She openly mocked Richard and Diane's wedding date, referring to it as the day of the great mistake. She actively ignored Chloe's birth, claiming the child was destined to be a spoiled terror. There was only one day of the year Beatrice consistently acknowledged. Every single year, without fail, she sent a handwritten card and a firm handshake to commemorate my birthday. It was the only date she honored, because she claimed I was the only Mitchell who possessed a spine. I raised my hand and typed the 6 numbers of my birth date into the glowing keypad. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a deep, satisfying thunk. The thick metal doors swung open on well-oiled hinges. A distinct scent wafted from the dark interior, wrapping around me like a sudden embrace. It was the sharp, crisp aroma of old paper, intertwined with the sweet, sharp notes of peppermint. Beatrice always carried a tin of mints in her coat pocket, offering them only to people she deemed worthy of a conversation. The scent was so vivid, so deeply tied to her memory, it felt as though she were standing right beside me, guiding my hands in the dim light. There were no stacks of cash or velvet jewelry boxes inside the steel cavity. Beatrice did not hoard depreciating assets. Instead, the safe contained a thick stack of manila folders secured with heavy rubber bands. I pulled the largest file out and carried it to her reading desk, switching on the brass banker's lamp. I snapped the rubber band and opened the cover. The first document was a certified deed of trust. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, searching for the property description. It was not a residential holding or a modest piece of land. It was a monumental commercial plaza located in the heart of downtown Chicago, occupying prime real estate near the financial district. The attached appraisal, printed on thick, glossy paper and dated just 6 months prior, valued the holding at over $12 million. The breath caught in my throat. During the boardroom ambush, Richard and Thorne had presented the estate as a meager collection of mutual funds and a small retirement account. They had deliberately concealed the crown jewel of Beatrice's empire. $12 million in commercial real estate generated immense monthly revenue through tenant leases, parking structures, and retail percentages. This was the true prize they were trying to steal with the quitclaim deed. But the initial surge of triumph quickly faded as my professional training seized control. You do not evaluate an asset based solely on its gross valuation. You examine the cash flow. You look at the liabilities. I dug deeper into the file, pulling out the recent financial statements and operating ledgers attached to the deed. The numbers did not make sense. A property of this magnitude, located in a premium urban sector, should have boasted overflowing reserve accounts and robust profit margins. Instead, the operating balances were shockingly low. I traced my finger down the column of monthly expenditures. The anomaly was glaring. Huge sums of money were bleeding out of the property's accounts, categorized vaguely as consulting fees, maintenance retainers, and administrative overhead. The payments were routed to obscure limited liability companies with generic names. Someone had been systematically draining the rental income for the past 3 years. The withdrawals were calculated, precise, and relentless, siphoning the financial lifeblood out of the commercial plaza. The operational accounts were practically dry. Then I found the final document tucked at the very bottom of the folder. It was a formal notice, printed on thick bank letterhead, demanding immediate attention. The words "pre-foreclosure warning" leaped off the page, printed in stark red ink. The plaza was delinquent on its foundational commercial mortgage property taxes and municipal levies. The missing funds had paralyzed the holding. The bank was initiating the final grace period before seizing the asset. The horrific reality of my situation locked into place, turning the quiet study into a claustrophobic trap. The asset was worth $12 million on paper, but it was weeks away from being reclaimed by the creditors. If the foreclosure went through before the estate cleared probate, the bank would liquidate the plaza to cover the defaulted mortgage. The immense value would vanish into corporate restructuring, leaving nothing behind for the heirs. My father knew this. Thorne knew this. They were trying to force me to sign the quitclaim to absorb the fraudulent identity theft debt, while simultaneously using the estate reading as a distraction. If the bank took the commercial property, I would be left holding nothing but Marcus's $500,000 anchor. I would be bankrupted and ruined, just as my father promised, with no inheritance to offset the devastating liabilities. The 48-hour audit was not just a threat to my family. It was a ticking clock on the property itself. I needed to find out exactly where that missing rental income had gone, and I had to trace the stolen funds before the federal sweep slammed the door shut on us all. I reached deeper into the chilled steel cavity of the wall safe. The metal felt like ice against my knuckles. Behind the stack of manila folders, my fingers brushed against the rough texture of tooled leather tucked carefully beneath a secondary false bottom. I gripped the heavy object and pulled it out into the dim light of the study. It was a thick-bound journal. The dark brown spine was worn soft from years of frequent use, holding a quiet weight in my hands. As I opened the thick cover, the familiar scent of sharp peppermint and aged parchment bloomed in the stale air of the room. I ran my index finger across the top page. Beatrice possessed a highly distinctive script. Her handwriting was a series of sharp, precise angles, executed in dark black fountain pen ink without a single crossed-out error. I felt an unexpected tightening in my throat, tracing those deliberate strokes. It felt like a posthumous conversation, a final connection to the only relative who recognized the quiet, analytical strength we both shared. The pages were not filled with diary entries or personal reflections. It was a meticulously maintained shadow ledger. I carried the leather-bound book to the antique reading desk, placing it flat beside the Commercial Plaza financial statements. My corporate training took over, instantly filtering out the emotional shock of the afternoon and narrowing my focus down to raw data points. I pulled a mechanical pencil from my purse and began cross-referencing the dates of the obscure limited liability company withdrawals against the handwritten entries in the journal. Beatrice had not just recorded the missing rental income, she had tracked exactly where every stolen dollar ended up. The ledger detailed a staggering timeline of familial theft. On October 14th, an $80,000 transfer was routed to a shell corporation disguised as a routine property maintenance fee. Next to that specific date, Beatrice had penned a corresponding note. Diane Mitchell, 4 weeks at the Hotel de Paris Monte Carlo. Travel expenses and baccarat table losses. I turned the page, the dry paper rasping loudly in the quiet study. On February 2nd, a withdrawal of $150,000 was logged under administrative overhead. Beatrice's margin note read simply, Richard Mitchell, margin calls on failing biomedical technology investments. The entries continued for dozens of pages, painting a damning portrait of a family utilizing the commercial holding as an endless personal slush fund. The largest withdrawals, however, were clustered over the past 18 months, matching the exact timeline of my decimated credit score. Consecutive transfers of $40,000 and $50,000 were funneled out of the Plaza operating accounts directly into another holding company. Beatrice had tracked those funds straight to Marcus Avery, detailing endless capital injections into his failing luxury auto detailing business. My aunt knew everything. She sat in this very chair watching them siphon the lifeblood out of her real estate empire, pushing her most valuable asset toward imminent foreclosure. But instead of confronting them at a holiday dinner or cutting off their access, she documented every single transaction. She gathered routing numbers, shell company registrations, and offshore account details. She was not just keeping track of the missing revenue. Beatrice was methodically building an airtight criminal case against her own brother and his enablers. Knowing that upon her death, the mandated federal audit would trap them inside a cage of their own making. The sheer brilliance of her plan left me awestruck. I needed to digitize this evidence immediately. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, opening the secure scanner application I used for corporate fieldwork. Before I could capture the first high-resolution image, the loud crunch of tires skidding recklessly on the gravel driveway shattered the silence of the Evanston neighborhood. A car door slammed shut with frantic force. The heavy oak front door of the Victorian house rattled on its hinges, then swung open, hitting the interior wall with a loud thud. Fast, unsteady footsteps echoed rapidly down the hardwood hallway, heading straight for the study. I closed the ledger, pulling the heavy book close to my chest as the double doors flew open. Chloe stood in the doorway. She was breathing heavily, her designer maternity dress wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. The smug, polished demeanor of the family golden child was entirely gone. She looked wild and unhinged. Her usually perfect blonde hair clung to her damp forehead in messy, uneven strands. She must have tracked the global positioning system location of my sedan through the shared family phone plan, racing here the second she realized where I had gone. "Zoe," she gasped, clutching the wooden doorframe to steady herself. I did not speak. I took a deliberate step back, putting the heavy wooden desk between us, gripping the leather journal tighter against my ribs. Chloe took a shaky, unsteady step into the room. Her wide eyes darted from the open wall safe to the scattered financial documents, and finally locked onto the bound book in my hands. The sight of the ledger seemed to break whatever fragile composure she had managed to hold onto during her drive. She collapsed to her knees on the faded Persian rug. A high-pitched, jagged sob tore from her throat, echoing off the tall bookshelves. "Please, Zoe," she wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of genuine desperation. "Please give me that book. You do not understand what is happening right now." "I understand exactly what is happening, Chloe." I kept my tone flat and even, refusing to let her emotional display manipulate my assessment of the room. "I am looking at a paper trail of felony wire fraud spanning 3 entire years." Chloe scrambled forward on her knees, gripping the carved edge of the antique desk. Tears streamed down her flushed cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark streaks across her jaw. She wrapped both of her hands around her swollen belly, weaponizing her pregnancy with ruthless precision. "You cannot let those auditors see those records," she begged, her chest heaving with every shallow breath. "If you hand that ledger over to the investigators, Marcus will go to federal prison. He is looking at 10 years, Zoe, 10 years minimum. My baby is due in 3 months. Are you really going to let my child grow up visiting their father through a glass window?" Her tactic shifted seamlessly from pathetic begging to brutal emotional extortion. She glared up at me, her tear-filled eyes flashing with a desperate, venomous heat. "This is your fault," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the ceiling. "If you had just signed the quitclaim this morning, none of this would be happening. We could have paid you back. We could have fixed the credit issue eventually, but you had to be stubborn. You are choosing a pile of old money over your own flesh and blood. You are choosing pure greed over your future niece." The sheer audacity of her accusation hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. She stood in a house she had helped pillage, defending a husband who stole my identity, and dared to call me the greedy one. "You stole my social security number," I stated, focusing on the rhythmic thumping of my own pulse to remain grounded and rational. "You and Marcus took out $450,000 in fraudulent subprime debt. You ruined my financial future so you could lease luxury cars and buy expensive country club memberships." "We were desperate," Chloe sobbed, wiping her running nose with the back of her trembling hand. "The business was failing so fast. Dad told us to use your profile because you never check your credit anyway, and you have no dependents. We were going to clear it. I swear to God, we were going to fix it once the estate was fully settled. You have a great corporate job, Zoe. You can recover from a temporary credit hit. My baby cannot recover from having a convicted felon for a father." She pushed herself up from the floor, leaning dangerously far over the desk, reaching directly for the ledger. Her manicured fingers brushed the edge of the leather binding. "Hand it over, Zoe. Let Dad handle the auditors. Sign the paper tomorrow morning and walk away. If you destroy my family today, I swear on my life I will never let you see this child. You will be dead to me." Her fingers gripped the corner of the book. I stared into the eyes of the younger sister who had spent 29 years taking everything she wanted, while I quietly stepped aside to keep the peace. She expected me to step aside one last time. She expected me to swallow $500,000 in felony debt and walk away so she could continue living a carefully curated lie in her suburban mansion. The choice resting in my hands was simple. I could save the sister who orchestrated my financial ruin, or I could secure the exact evidence required to send her husband to a federal penitentiary. I yanked the leather-bound book out of her reach. Chloe's manicured fingers grasped empty air, scraping against the polished mahogany of the antique desk. The desperate sobbing vanished in an instant. The tears drying on her flushed cheeks were replaced by a hard, calculating glare that mirrored our father's courtroom stare. The mask of the terrified, expectant mother fractured, exposing the ruthless entitlement underneath. I did not raise my voice. I kept my posture rigid and told her to get out of my aunt's house before I dialed the local precinct. Chloe slowly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her designer maternity dress. She leveled a venomous look at me, promising in a low whisper that I would regret my choice. I watched her luxury sport utility vehicle speed down the long gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of white dust. Once her taillights disappeared around the bend, I locked the heavy oak doors. I spent the next 3 hours photographing every single page of the Shadow Ledger, uploading the high-resolution files to an encrypted offshore cloud server I maintained for sensitive corporate data. The sun rose over Lake Michigan the next morning, casting a pale gray light across the city. The digital clock on my nightstand read 7 exactly when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a formal summons sent directly from the desk of Harrison Thorne, demanding my immediate presence at his downtown law firm by 9 o'clock. The subject line cited urgent and time-sensitive estate developments. The 48-hour forensic audit was ticking down rapidly. Time was a shrinking commodity. I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, securing the digital backups of the ledger on 2 separate encrypted flash drives hidden inside my briefcase. I left the physical book secured inside a secondary floor safe I had discovered hidden beneath the floorboards in Beatrice's study. The atmosphere inside Thorne's corner office had shifted drastically since yesterday. During the initial ambush, the room pulsed with frantic, chaotic desperation. Today, a frigid clinical calm settled over the expensive leather chairs and polished surfaces. My father sat at the head of the long table, wearing a pristine navy suit and a silk tie. He looked rested, his posture radiating a predatory confidence. My mother occupied the chair to his right. She did not bother to offer her fake country club smile this time. Instead, Diane produced a crystal emery board from her Prada handbag. She focused her entire attention on filing her thumbnails. The rhythmic, abrasive scrape of the glass tool cutting across her acrylic nails filled the quiet room. She refused to even look at me when I walked through the glass doors. "Take a seat, Zoe," my father commanded, gesturing to the empty leather chair opposite him. I remained standing, gripping the handle of my briefcase. "I prefer to stand. What is this about, Richard?" He slid a thick black binder across the polished wood. The heavy plastic thudded to a halt mere inches from my hands. It was meticulously organized, lined with color-coded index tabs and an embossed cover page. "Open it," he instructed, his tone devoid of any paternal warmth. My training as a risk analyst kicked in immediately. I flipped the heavy cover back, dissecting the documents laid out before me. The breath stalled in my lungs. It was a masterpiece of manufactured evidence. The binder contained dozens of printed email chains dating back 3 years. The sender address matched my personal secure account perfectly. The messages contained detailed instructions authorizing the exact illicit withdrawals Beatrice had tracked in her ledger. The text directed the transfer of the Commercial Plaza funds into the various obscure shell companies. I turned the page, my eyes scanning the attached PDF contracts. The digital signatures appended to the bottom of the printed agreements were flawless replicas of my corporate electronic authorization stamp. Richard had utilized his extensive legal resources and dark connections to fabricate an entire alternate reality. He had hired someone to spoof my internet protocol address, backdating the correspondence to make it appear as though I was the mastermind orchestrating the embezzlement. The narrative the binder constructed was damning. It painted me as a rogue financial analyst, using my insider knowledge to bleed my own aunt's estate dry. They were framing me for the theft they committed to fund Diane's gambling debts and Marcus's failing auto detailing shop. "You have a choice, Zoe," my father stated, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. "That dossier contains enough circumstantial evidence to convince any detective at the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Unit that you systematically drained Beatrice's commercial holdings. We have witness affidavits from the shell company directors willing to testify that they took orders directly from you. I stared at the forged signatures, feeling a surreal disconnect from the paper in front of me. You fabricated a federal crime, I said, my voice tight. You forged my digital identity to protect a thief. We are prepared to hand this over to the fraud division before noon. Richard continued, ignoring my accusation entirely. You will be arrested. You will be indicted. The subsequent scandal will ensure you are fired from your corporate firm and stripped of your financial licenses before the weekend. Your career will be over. You will spend the next decade fighting federal wire fraud charges. Diane paused her filing just long enough to blow a speck of acrylic dust from her cuticle. We really do not want to see you go to prison, darling, she murmured, her eyes still fixed intently on her hands. It would be such an ugly stain on the family reputation. But Richard is right. We must protect Chloe and Marcus. Be practical. Just do what your father says. Or, I prompted, turning my gaze back to the man orchestrating my ruin. Or you can sign the quitclaim deed right now, Richard said, his voice dropping to a smooth, persuasive cadence. Assume the business debts under your Social Security number. Forfeit your share of the estate. If you take the liability and walk away quietly, we will throw this binder into the office shredder today. You keep your freedom, and you keep your job. You have exactly 24 hours to decide before I make the phone call. Extortion. Pure, unadulterated blackmail occurring in broad daylight inside a licensed attorney's office. The sheer brazenness of the threat was paralyzing. I looked across the table at Harrison Thorne. The estate lawyer sat quietly, his hands folded neatly over his yellow legal pad. As an officer of the court witnessing a blatant attempt at criminal extortion, his ethical duty was unambiguous. I expected him to halt the meeting. I expected him to advise my father that fabricating evidence was a severe felony that could result in immediate disbarment. Mr. Thorne, I said, keeping my tone steady despite the rapid pounding of my heart. You are observing a blackmail attempt, utilizing forged documents to steal an inheritance. Are you going to intervene and uphold the law, or should I dial the authorities myself right now? Thorne did not blink. His expression remained entirely neutral behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He slowly unclasped his hands, picked up the quitclaim deed, and slid it silently across the table, positioning it directly over the fake dossier. He laid a fresh Mont Blanc pen on top of the crisp paper. Settling family matters quietly is always the best course of action, Zoe, he advised. His tone was smooth and entirely devoid of morality. The courts are messy. Litigation is brutally expensive, and public records can destroy a young professional's reputation. Sometimes, assuming a temporary burden is the most pragmatic way to ensure everyone moves forward without unnecessary legal casualties. I highly recommend you take your father's generous offer. A sickening drop hollowed out my stomach. The polished hardwood floor beneath me seemed to tilt. Thorne was not a neutral mediator. He was not a frightened lawyer caught in the middle of a toxic family dispute trying to keep the peace. The smooth, practiced way he presented the extortion revealed the horrifying truth. He was on Richard's payroll. Thorne was actively helping my family cover up their crimes against Beatrice's estate. He had likely drafted the fake contracts in the dossier himself, utilizing his intimate knowledge of probate law to ensure the frame-up looked legally impenetrable. The realization hit me with a terrifying, cold clarity. I was not just fighting my corrupt relatives, I was fighting the very legal system designed to protect me. The attorney sworn to uphold Beatrice's final wishes was the architect helping them tear her legacy apart. The trap was locked, and the men holding the keys were standing right in front of me. I did not waste my breath arguing with corrupt men. The heavy glass door of Harrison Thorne's law firm clicked shut behind me, sealing the extortionists inside their polished mahogany cage. The morning sun glared off the concrete sidewalks of the Chicago financial district, but my skin felt coated in frost. A profound, isolating clarity washed over me. The justice system was not going to intervene. The attorney, bound by ethical oaths, was an active participant in my framing. If I wanted to survive the next 24 hours, I had to dismantle their operation from the inside out. My risk analysis training dictates that when you encounter a rigged system, you stop playing by its rules and start examining the architect. I flagged a passing cab and directed the driver to my secure corporate office building. The ride was a blur of yellow steel and blaring horns, but my mind was a cold, quiet room organizing data. I bypassed the crowded lobby filled with morning commuters and rode the express elevator up to my floor, locking myself inside my glass-walled suite. I booted up my dual-monitor workstation. A corporate financial risk analyst possesses tools the average civilian cannot even fathom. I hold specialized licenses that grant me deep, encrypted access to federal corporate registries, global financial crime tracking nodes, and proprietary data mining software. My family thought they had cornered a helpless daughter. They had actually cornered a licensed forensic data specialist, armed with the digital equivalent of a wrecking ball. I began by pulling every public and private record associated with Harrison Thorne. On the surface, his professional profile was impeccable. He boasted decades of pristine legal service, high-profile philanthropic board memberships, and a spotless disciplinary record with the Illinois State Bar Association. He was a pillar of the local legal community. But pristine profiles are often the thickest armor meant to deflect casual scrutiny. I bypassed his domestic holdings and instructed the algorithm to search for offshore corporate structures, cross-referencing his proprietary law firm email server domain against international banking registries in known tax havens. The loading bar crept slowly across my screen, a thin blue line slicing through the dark interface. The quiet hum of my computer tower felt incredibly loud in the empty office. When the query finished and the results populated across both monitors, the pristine armor shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Thorne was not just a respected probate lawyer. He was the registered agent and silent architect for a sprawling, interconnected web of offshore shell companies based primarily in the Cayman Islands and the Isle of Man. I traced the routing numbers attached to those foreign entities, following the complex digital breadcrumbs back to domestic clearing accounts. The funds were not remaining hidden overseas. They were being systematically repatriated into the United States economy through a coordinated network of service-based, cash-heavy businesses. I ran a reverse cross-reference on the primary domestic receiver, targeting the exact account catching the highest volume of these laundered transfers. The algorithm matched the routing number in a fraction of a second. The text glared at me from the high-definition monitor, glowing with a toxic urgency. Apex Elite Detailing. The name locked the entire puzzle into place. Marcus. My brother-in-law was not merely a failed entrepreneur propped up by my stolen credit profile. He was operating a sophisticated money laundering front. High-end luxury auto detailing is the perfect vehicle for washing dirty cash. The mechanics of the crime are remarkably simple. You can easily fabricate invoices for expensive ceramic coatings, custom paint corrections, and premium interior restorations. A client pays $10,000 in illicit funds for a phantom service that never actually happens, and the dirty money enters the legitimate banking system as clean, taxable revenue. Thorne was using Marcus to launder immense sums of money for his wealthy, illicit clients. That was the missing link. That was the exact reason Thorne was willing to risk his prestigious career disbarment and a federal prison sentence to help my father frame me. If the estate forensic auditors dug too deeply into Marcus's fraudulent subprime loans, they would inevitably cross the wires and uncover the money laundering apparatus hidden underneath. If Marcus went down for identity theft, he would drag Thorne down with him, exposing the offshore accounts and the corrupt clients who trusted the lawyer to clean their illicit capital. Thorne was not helping Richard out of paternal loyalty or simple greed. He was protecting a lucrative criminal empire. I dug deeper into the localized metadata associated with the earliest offshore transfers, determined to find the origin point of their arrangement. A secondary window opened on my screen, displaying an archived digital newsletter from an exclusive private country club located in the wealthy northern suburbs. The image was slightly grainy, a candid photograph taken during a charity golf tournament 3 years ago. The caption beneath the photo celebrated local business partnerships and community leaders. In the center of the frame, Harrison Thorne stood on the manicured green, smiling broadly and shaking hands with Marcus. It was the exact date the very first offshore shell company was legally registered. The firm handshake captured by the camera did not signify a friendly golf victory. It sealed a dark, highly lucrative partnership disguised as leisure. Armed with this devastating leverage, I formulated my counterattack. I opened a secure, encrypted word processor and began drafting a highly detailed anonymous tip intended for both the Ethics Board of the State Bar Association and the Financial Crimes Division of the federal authorities. I exported the routing numbers, the offshore registry documents, and the archived country club photograph onto a secure external drive. But digital evidence alone is often dismissed by defense attorneys as circumstantial, unverified, or the product of unauthorized hacking. I needed the physical proof to anchor the timeline and prove the family's long-standing pattern of embezzlement. I needed Aunt Beatrice's original handwritten ledger. Earlier that morning, before heading to the extortion meeting, I had retrieved the leather-bound book from the Evanston property. I knew carrying the singular piece of damning evidence into Thorne's office was far too risky, so I had secured it inside my own downtown apartment. My residence featured a high-grade biometric wall safe designed specifically to protect sensitive corporate hard drives and confidential client files. I needed to leave my office, grab the physical book from my safe, pair it with the newly compiled digital dossier on Thorne, and hand the entire devastating package directly to a federal agent before my father's 24-hour deadline expired. I slipped the encrypted drive into my pocket, powered down my workstation, and left the office. The walk to my high-rise apartment building spanned 4 city blocks. The afternoon air was thick and oppressive, signaling an approaching summer storm. The uniformed doorman nodded politely as I passed through the glass lobby doors. Everything appeared ordinary. The quiet, classical music playing from the hidden lobby speakers did nothing to soothe the adrenaline pulsing in my veins. The elevator chimed softly, depositing me onto the residential floor. The hallway was silent, lined with plush carpet and modern sconces. As I turned the final corner toward my unit, my rapid footsteps slowed to a halt. The heavy, fireproof door to my apartment was standing 2 inches ajar. The brass deadbolt was splintered, the metal casing twisted and deeply gouged by a heavy steel pry bar. The thick wood frame was fractured, exposing pale, raw splinters that contrasted sharply with the dark paint. The locking mechanism hung uselessly from its hinges. I pushed the damaged door open, my heart hammering a harsh, erratic rhythm against my ribs. The interior of my home, my quiet, personal sanctuary, had been subjected to a methodical, frantic tearing apart. The sleek, minimalist living room was unrecognizable. The gray sofa cushions were slashed open from seam to seam, the white synthetic stuffing scattered across the hardwood floor like dirty snow. Every drawer from my kitchen, islands, and entryway console had been pulled off its tracks and dumped, forming chaotic mounds of silverware, mail, and personal items. I bypassed the wreckage of the living area, stepping over broken lamps and shattered ceramic vases, moving directly down the short hallway into my bedroom. My clothes were pulled from their hangers, pooling in messy heaps on the carpet. The large piece of modern artwork hanging over my dresser had been ripped down the heavy glass frame, shattered into dangerous shards across the floor. Behind where the painting used to hang, the heavy steel door of my biometric safe hung wide open. The electronic keypad was smashed inward, crushed by a blunt instrument, forcing the internal locking mechanism to fail. I stood in the center of the ruin, my breath catching in my throat as I stared into the dark, empty cavity of the safe. The velvet-lined shelves were bare. The original handwritten ledger belonging to Beatrice was gone. The only physical proof of my family's relentless embezzlement, the singular, tangible object capable of proving my aunt's intentions and clearing my name, had been stolen. My parents had not just given me a 24-hour ultimatum. They had sent someone to break into my home and disarm me while I sat captive in that boardroom, listening to their threats. I was standing in the wreckage of my own life, holding a mountain of digital data, but stripped of the one physical artifact that could guarantee my freedom. The smell of ozone and burnt plastic lingered near the ruined biometric lock. The perpetrators had used a heavy kinetic drill to bypass the reinforced steel plating of my wall safe. Feathers from my torn-down pillows drifted through the drafty hallway, settling onto the scuffed hardwood floor. They had overturned every piece of furniture, pulled the books from my shelves by their spines, and shattered my bathroom mirrors. A normal person confronted with the desecration of their private sanctuary might succumb to overwhelming despair. I felt only a cold, distinct validation. The thoroughness of their destruction proved their desperation. My father and Thorne had sent a professional to extract the ledger, assuming I was a naive civilian who relied on heavy metal doors for protection. They failed to understand that physical security is an illusion. True security exists only in decentralized redundancy. When I originally retrieved Aunt Beatrice's shadow ledger from her quiet Evanston study, I recognized its fragile nature immediately. Leather-bound pages are susceptible to fire, water, and theft. They represent a single point of failure. Before I even locked the heavy oak doors of her historic property, I positioned the book under the concentrated beam of her brass reading lamp. I utilized a proprietary forensic scanning application installed on my corporate device. The software is designed for field agents investigating complex corporate espionage. I spent 2 meticulous hours turning each delicate page, ensuring the lens captured the exact pressure of Beatrice's fountain pen strokes. The application automatically enhanced the contrast, bringing her sharp margin notes into stunning high definition. The moment the shutter clicked, the software encrypted the images into unbreakable data packets, transmitting them directly to a secure offshore cloud server. The facility hosting my backups resides in a jurisdiction that routinely ignores domestic subpoenas and local warrants. My parents believed they had disarmed me by prying open my apartment safe. They had merely stolen an empty shell. The actual weapon, the verified routing numbers, and chronological forensic timelines remained untouched, floating across multiple decentralized global networks. My preparations extended far beyond simple digital duplication. I needed to confirm exactly who would reach into the trap. Frequent international corporate travel requires securing sensitive logistical equipment, and I always carry several micro-location trackers. They are slim, discrete devices utilizing advanced satellite positioning, requiring no external power source for months. Before placing the physical ledger into my safe, I carefully separated the thick leather spine from the binding. I slid the tiny beacon deep into the hidden gap, sealing the minor incision with a drop of clear synthetic adhesive. Standing amid the ruins of my bedroom, I pulled my smartphone from my tailored blazer and launched the tracking interface. The topographical map of the greater metropolitan area rendered smoothly on the illuminated glass. A solitary crimson beacon pulsed with rhythmic mathematical precision, broadcasting the exact coordinates of the stolen book. The signal originated from a sprawling gated estate located in the affluent North Shore district. It was transmitting directly from my parents' primary residential address. I closed my eyes and pictured Richard pouring 2 fingers of expensive scotch, offering a triumphant toast to Diane and Marcus. They were likely celebrating their perceived victory, unaware they were holding a beacon that actively monitored their every movement. I refused to sleep in the compromised apartment. The splintered deadbolt left the entryway vulnerable, so I spent the dark hours physically dragging a heavy, solid oak dining table across the floor to barricade the door. I packed a discreet, tactical duffel bag with essential corporate attire, spare lithium power banks, and my encrypted external hard drives. I spent the remainder of the night sitting on the floor, illuminated only by the glow of my dual monitors, cross-referencing the offshore shell companies linked to Harrison Thorne. Outside my shattered window, the city skyline gradually shifted from pitch black to the bruised gray of early dawn. The relentless internal ticking of the clock echoed loudly in my mind. The automated federal audit triggered by Beatrice's codicil would reach its final, unalterable conclusion in less than 24 hours. I needed caffeine to sharpen my focus for the final sequence of my counteroffensive. I departed the building through a subterranean service exit, bypassing the lobby security cameras to avoid leaving a digital footprint. The morning air felt dense, heavy with impending rain and the exhaust of early commuters. I walked 2 blocks to a bustling independent cafe, joining the fast-moving line of patrons. The rich scent of roasted espresso beans and damp wool coats provided a fleeting, comforting sense of normalcy. I stepped up to the marble counter and ordered a dark roast, sliding my premium titanium debit card into the point-of-sale terminal. The machine processed the embedded chip for a fraction of a second before emitting a sharp, discordant beep. The digital display flashed a bright red denial message. Assuming a simple magnetic error, I retrieved a secondary high-limit credit card from my wallet. The terminal chimed again, declined. The barista offered an apologetic grimace, sliding the plastic back across the counter with a practiced, polite neutrality. The line behind me shifted, exhaling a collective sigh of restless impatience. I left the steaming cup on the bar and stepped back out onto the rain-slicked pavement, a sudden, profound chill gripping my spine that had nothing to do with the falling temperature. I retreated under the dark green canvas awning of a closed boutique, shielding my device from the steady drizzle. I launched my mobile banking application. The facial recognition software authenticated my identity, loading the central dashboard. The numbers rendering on the screen defied basic logic. My primary corporate checking account showed an available balance of $0. My high-yield savings displayed the identical barren figure. I tapped the tab for my extensive retirement portfolio and found a stark gray lock icon warning of restricted administrative access. My entire financial ecosystem, decades of disciplined saving and calculated investing, had been drained of all liquidity in the span of a single morning. I dialed the premier client service hotline, reserved exclusively for high-net-worth account holders. A representative answered almost immediately, her tone polite but strictly guarded. I demanded a full, detailed explanation for the systemic freeze across my entire portfolio. The customer service agent hesitated, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line before she began reading from a legal notation appended to my profile. A hard legal hold was placed on my assets at precisely 8 o'clock this morning. The initiating document was an emergency medical power of attorney filed by my mother, Diane Mitchell. The paperwork was drafted, stamped, and officially notarized by Harrison Thorne. The representative recited the specific clauses of the injunction with clinical detachment. The legal filing claimed I was experiencing a severe psychological break, suffering from erratic, paranoid delusions, and presenting an imminent physical risk of self-harm. Under the guise of protecting a mentally unstable relative, my parents had petitioned a friendly municipal judge to grant them immediate, total conservatorship over my life. They had successfully frozen my checking, savings, and retirement accounts. The strategy was breathtaking in its ruthless surgical efficiency. They did not just want to steal the physical evidence, they needed to paralyze my ability to fight back on every conceivable front. By establishing a formalized legal record of mental instability, they effectively nullified my credibility as an expert witness. If I walked into a police precinct holding digital files claiming my prominent wealthy family forged an embezzlement dossier, the detectives would pull my background file. They would see a disturbed daughter enduring a documented psychotic breakdown. My relatives had severed my access to capital and poisoned my professional reputation simultaneously. I stood alone on the bustling Chicago sidewalk, holding a useless piece of titanium. I was entirely stranded, devoid of cash, locked out of my own resources, with the audit deadline looming on the horizon like an executioner's blade. Standing beneath the dripping canvas awning, I stared at the useless plastic rectangle in my palm. The steady drizzle washed over the Chicago pavement, mirroring the cold reality of my situation. My relatives had successfully severed my financial arteries. They believed stripping me of capital would force a swift surrender. They assumed a daughter deprived of her checking and savings accounts would crawl back to the North Shore estate, begging for mercy and offering to sign their fraudulent documents just to survive the week. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my profession. A risk analyst does not beg. We analyze the board, identify the opponent's center of gravity, and execute a calculated countermeasure. I slipped the dead card into my pocket and gripped the heavy strap of my tactical duffel bag. My corporate identification badge still rested securely around my neck. The municipal courts might have frozen my personal wealth, but they had not revoked my security clearance at the firm. I walked swiftly back toward my office building, ignoring the damp chill seeping through my charcoal blazer. The towering glass structure represented my last remaining sanctuary. I swiped my credentials at the private employee turnstile, bypassing the front desk and riding the elevator up to my secluded suite. The trading floor outside my glass walls was already buzzing with morning activity, but inside my locked room, the air was silent and controlled. I booted up my workstation, initiating a secure, encrypted connection that bypassed standard commercial internet service providers. My parents utilized local judges and fabricated medical directives to strangle my domestic retail banking. Those were provincial tactics. I was about to escalate the conflict to a jurisdiction where local influence carried zero weight. I navigated directly to the secure portal of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. As a licensed professional overseeing institutional compliance, I possessed direct reporting access to federal regulatory agencies. The interface was stark gray and demanding. It required no dramatic narratives or emotional pleas. The federal system runs on raw mathematical truth. I initiated a formalized suspicious activity report outlining a severe ongoing syndicate operation. The form demanded precise data parameters. I did not hesitate. I typed Marcus Avery into the primary target field, appending his date of birth and the corporate tax identification number for Apex Elite Detailing. I moved to the next section, entering my father legal practice credentials and my mother primary routing information. The true devastating power of the filing, however, lay in the Supplementary Evidence tab. I extracted the high-resolution digital scans of Beatrice Shadow Ledger from my encrypted drive. I manually transcribed the exact offshore routing numbers Harrison Thorne utilized to wash the illicit capital through the Cayman Islands. I cross-referenced those specific alphanumeric sequences with the dates of the subprime loans taken out under my stolen identity. When you submit a report containing matching offshore tax haven endpoints linked to verified domestic cash businesses, the federal compliance algorithms do not pause to ask questions. They operate on rigid anti-money laundering protocols designed to halt capital flight instantly. I clicked the submit button. The screen flashed a brief confirmation code. The payload was delivered. Within the subterranean server farms of the federal banking apparatus, a silent, invisible tripwire snapped tight. The algorithmic system cross-checked my submission, flagging the corresponding accounts across every major institution in the country. When the government suspects severe, ongoing wire fraud, they do not send a polite warning letter. They drop a titanium net. The system bypasses regional managers and local branch authority, triggering an immediate hard freeze on all liquid assets connected to the targeted individuals. Every checking balance, every investment portfolio, and every credit line tied to the Mitchell name and Marcus detailing shop was locked down pending a comprehensive investigation. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, listening to the quiet hum of the ventilation system. The balance of power had shifted. I was no longer the prey trapped in a corner. I had just disabled their entire war machine. The validation of my strike arrived exactly 42 minutes later. My personal cellular device vibrated across the sleek surface of my desk. The illuminated screen displayed a frantic incoming text message from Diane. I unlocked the device and read the chaotic block of text. The pristine illusion of my mother, high society life, had just collided with reality in the most humiliating public venue possible. Diane was attempting to host a lavish brunch for her elite circle of country club associates at an exclusive Michelin star restaurant downtown. The bill had arrived, reflecting a decadent spread of imported caviar and vintage champagne. Diane had confidently presented her signature platinum credit card, expecting the usual deferential treatment from the waitstaff. Instead, the server had returned to the table holding the rejected plastic, informing her in front of her affluent peers that the card was declined. Diane demanded they run a secondary premium card, which the machine also rejected. The text message radiated pure apoplectic rage, accusing me of manipulating the banking software and demanding I reverse the error before her reputation was permanently ruined. I deleted the message without replying, placing the phone face down on my desk. Diane, public humiliation was merely a symptom of the larger, systemic paralysis I had inflicted upon them. Back at the sprawling suburban estate, Richard would be staring at his own frozen portfolio monitors, realizing the depth of his miscalculation. He had attempted to suffocate me financially, but I had severed his access to oxygen altogether. A man like my father, a high-powered litigator, accustomed to bending the world to his will, does not retreat when he loses control. He escalates. Richard viewed my defiance as an unforgivable mutiny. If he could not bend me through financial starvation, he would pivot his attack to the only remaining pillar of my independence. He would target my professional sanctuary. My career was the foundation of my autonomy, the sole reason I possessed the resources to fight him on equal footing. To win this war, he needed to obliterate my credibility in front of the people who paid my salary. My corporate firm operates on a strict code of professionalism. The managing partners demand flawless ethical conduct and an unblemished public image. Any hint of scandal, domestic instability, or erratic behavior is met with swift termination. Richard knew this protocol intimately. He understood that a sudden, catastrophic public scene unfolding directly on the trading floor would force human resources to sever my employment, just to contain the reputational damage. He would not bother scheduling a meeting or going through the legal department. He was coming to wage psychological warfare in broad daylight. The quiet sanctuary of my glass office suddenly felt like a fragile, transparent fishbowl. Beyond my locked door, the vast open plan of the trading desk hummed with junior analysts and senior executives engrossed in their morning market assessments. They were entirely unprepared for the incoming storm. The soft chime of the private executive elevator echoed through the expansive room, signaling an arrival. Heavy, rapid footsteps struck the polished marble floor of the reception area, bypassing the startled security desk with arrogant momentum. The threat was no longer digital. It was standing right outside my door. The heavy oak doors of the trading floor swung inward, hitting the glass partitions with a deafening crack. My father marched into the expansive room, his pristine navy suit jacket flapping behind him like a dark cape. He held the thick black binder high in his right hand, wielding the fabricated dossier like a weapon. His voice boomed across the open floor, shattering the disciplined quiet of the morning market analysis. "Where is the Vice President of Human Resources?" he demanded, his face flushed and angry, mottled red. "I need to speak with the managing partners right now. I am exposing a corporate thief." Dozens of junior analysts and senior portfolio managers stopped typing. The rhythmic clatter of keyboards ceased, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. My firm handles multi-billion-dollar portfolios for international clients. Our workspace is a fortress of discretion and hushed conversations. The sudden arrival of a shouting, unhinged man waving a binder was an unprecedented breach of protocol. Richard scanned the sea of cubicles, searching for my glass suite. When his eyes locked onto mine, a predatory smile stretched across his face. He expected me to dive under my desk or rush out, begging him to keep his voice down. He anticipated a desperate daughter, terrified of public humiliation, willing to capitulate to save her career. I did not cower. A seasoned risk analyst thrives in volatile conditions. When a market crashes, you do not panic. You execute the mitigation protocols you already put in place. I reached for the sleek black console on my desk, pressing the dedicated emergency line that connects directly to the building's central security hub. My voice remained steady and clinical as I spoke to the dispatcher. We have a hostile trespasser on the fourth-floor trading desk. He is verbally combative and attempting to disrupt operations. Please dispatch physical security and notify local law enforcement immediately. I placed the receiver back onto its cradle and smoothed the lapels of my charcoal blazer. I pushed my glass door open and stepped out onto the plush carpet of the main floor facing my father. "Zoe!" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Tell your superiors what you did. Tell them how you forged documents to steal from your own family. I have the proof right here." He slapped the black binder against the edge of a nearby cubicle, scattering a junior associate paperwork. I walked toward him, stopping exactly 10 feet away, maintaining a safe, tactical distance. My voice was calm, but pitched to carry across the entire silent room. "Richard Mitchell, you are trespassing on private corporate property. I am stating for the record that you are a hostile actor attempting to extort me. You fabricated that dossier to cover up your ongoing wire fraud and identity theft. I have already submitted a formal suspicious activity report to the Federal Financial Crimes Network detailing your embezzlement." The mention of federal reporting struck him like a physical blow. The arrogant sneer faltered, giving way to genuine shock. He had assumed his local municipal judge and phony medical directives had neutralized me. He did not realize I had bypassed his provincial tactics and triggered a federal freeze on his entire financial existence. Before Richard could formulate a cohesive response, the elevator doors pinged open. 4 burly security guards, clad in dark tactical uniforms, poured onto the floor. They moved with swift, practiced efficiency, surrounding my father. "Sir, you need to vacate the premises immediately," the lead guard ordered, placing a firm hand on Richard's shoulder. "Take your hands off me," Richard spat, attempting to wrench his arm free. "I am a senior partner at a respected law firm. I am here to report a felony." His resistance was the final mistake in a morning built on catastrophic miscalculations. The guards did not care about his legal credentials or his bespoke suit. They recognized a physical threat and neutralized it. 2 guards seized his arms, twisting them behind his back with practiced force. The black binder slipped from his grasp, hitting the floor with a dull thud, bursting open to scatter the forged emails across the carpet. I glanced toward the executive suites. Eleanor Vance, our notoriously strict director of human resources, stood in her doorway. She was a woman who rarely showed emotion, known for her icy demeanor and ruthless efficiency. Right now, her eyes were wide with undisguised shock. She watched the chaotic scene unfold, her manicured hand hovering over her mouth. She watched as Richard, a man who prided himself on his impeccable public image, was physically dragged backward toward the freight elevators. His designer silk tie was yanked askew, hanging limply over his shoulder. His polished loafers scuffed against the carpet as he struggled, a humiliating spectacle of a man losing his grip on reality. By the time the Chicago Police Department arrived in the lobby, the building security team had already detained him. The officers placed him in handcuffs, charging him with criminal trespass and disorderly conduct. His attempt to orchestrate my professional ruin had culminated in his own public arrest. The fallout required my presence at the local precinct to file a formal statement regarding the trespassing incident. The process consumed several hours of bureaucratic paperwork and redundant interviews with exhausted detectives. The police station smelled of stale coffee floor wax and damp wool. I sat in a hard plastic chair, methodically detailing my father's erratic behavior and his attempts to disrupt my workplace, providing the officers with a sterile, factual account of the morning events. I deliberately omitted the federal financial reporting, leaving that jurisdictional nightmare for the federal agents to unpack later. It was past 7 in the evening when I finally pushed through the heavy glass doors of the precinct, stepping out into the cold Chicago night. The rain had subsided, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. The sharp wind bit through my blazer, reminding me of the physical exhaustion settling into my bones. I walked toward the corner to hail a taxi when a dark shape detached itself from the shadows across the street. A black luxury sport utility vehicle idled near the curb, its headlights extinguished. The deep rumble of its heavy engine vibrated through the damp air. As I approached the intersection, the vehicle rolled forward, matching my pace. The tinted passenger window slid down with a faint electronic hum. I stopped on the wet sidewalk, my muscles tensing in anticipation of another attack. The interior of the vehicle was dim, illuminated only by the faint glow of the dashboard instrument panel. Marcus sat behind the steering wheel. He looked nothing like the polished, charismatic entrepreneur who had smirked at me from his driveway yesterday afternoon. His custom-tailored shirt was wrinkled and unbuttoned at the collar. A thick sheen of sweat coated his forehead, despite the chill in the air. He gripped the leather steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes darting frantically up and down the empty street. The federal asset freeze had clearly struck its target. His money laundering operation was locked down. His accounts were zeroed out, and the invisible walls of a federal indictment were closing in around him. "Zoe, get in!" he hissed, his voice trembling with an uncharacteristic, raw panic. "Please, we have to talk before Chloe notices I took the car." I remained rooted to the pavement, keeping a safe distance from the idling machine. "I have nothing to say to a man who stole my identity, Marcus." He leaned across the center console, his face pale and desperate in the streetlights. "I can give you Thorne," he pleaded. "I have the ledger codes, the offshore routing numbers, and the encrypted emails proving Thorne orchestrated the money laundering. I will hand over his entire illicit client list. I will go on the record and testify that Richard and Chloe engineered the whole Social Security scheme. I will give you everything you need to destroy them, if you just promise to tell the feds to grant me immunity." The amber streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement cast long, distorted shadows across the intersection. I reach deep into my tailored blazer pocket. My thumb finds the side button on my smartphone, pressing it twice in rapid succession to activate the encrypted voice memo application. A short, distinct haptic vibration confirms the microphone is live and recording. I reach out and pull the heavy handle of the idling sport utility vehicle, sliding onto the cold leather passenger seat. The interior smells of stale designer cologne and raw, visceral fear. Marcus hits the central locking mechanism the second I pull the door shut, sealing us inside. The ambient noise of the bustling Chicago traffic fades into a dull, muffled hum. I keep my posture rigid, facing the rain-slicked windshield, refusing to grant him the comfort of eye contact. "The federal asset freeze hit my accounts right at noon," he says, his voice hoarse and ragged. "My corporate credit cards are bouncing everywhere. The detailing shop operating funds are zeroed out to the last penny. My premium vendors are calling my personal cell phone, threatening to file mechanic liens against the client cars. You crippled me, Zoe." I turn my head slowly to study the man who ruined my financial identity. The polished, charismatic facade he wore at country club dinners is gone. He looks haggard and fractured. "I did not cripple you, Marcus. You built a house of cards on a stolen foundation. The compliance algorithms simply turned on the lights. He reaches into the deep center console, his hands shaking so badly the plastic hinges rattle. He pulls out a polished silver flask, unscrewing the cap with clumsy, uncoordinated fingers. He takes a long, shaky pull from the metal container. The sharp, stinging scent of aged single malt scotch fills the confined space, masking the scent of his cologne. It is a luxury spirit he can no longer afford to purchase. He lowers the flask, resting it on his thigh. "You think I orchestrated the identity theft?" he mutters, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You think I am some sophisticated criminal mastermind who hacked your biometric verification questions? I just wash expensive cars for rich people. I do not know your childhood street address. I do not know the name of your first pet or your maternal grandmother maiden name." The implication hangs heavy in the damp air inside the vehicle. My pulse quickens, recognizing the value of the information he is about to surrender. I maintain my clinical detachment, ensuring the hidden microphone captures every syllable clearly. "Who provided the security verification data, Marcus?" He turns to face me. His eyes are bloodshot and lined with dark shadows. "Chloe," he whispers, "your perfect, flawless sister. She handed me your pristine profile on a silver platter." Marcus takes another reckless drink from the flask, the liquor sloshing audibly in the quiet cabin. He explains exactly how the fraud originated, unspooling the dark reality of the Mitchell family dynamic. Richard and Diane were the ones systematically draining Beatrice Commercial Plaza. They needed the rental income to float your mother horrific gambling debts and your father underwater biomedical investments. But Chloe refused to downgrade her extravagant lifestyle when the residual cash dried up. When my detailing business hit a severe cash flow crisis, she panicked. She realized she could not afford the country club dues, the designer maternity clothes, or the luxury lease on this exact vehicle. "She went into your archival files, stored at your parents' estate," he continues, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "She found your old tax returns, your original birth certificate, and your banking security forms. She forged your signature on the subprime loan applications. I just facilitated the corporate paperwork for the shop to receive the incoming wire transfers. Chloe was the one actively draining your credit profile to fund her manicured life. She told me you were making a fortune as a corporate risk analyst and would never even notice the discrepancy." I let his words wash over me, committing the timeline to memory. The audio file, recording quietly in my pocket, is capturing the ultimate exoneration. The fabricated dossier Richard presented in Harrison Thorne office earlier today is now rendered useless. A sworn, recorded confession from a co-conspirator detailing the exact origin of the stolen Social Security number shreds their blackmail attempt into worthless confetti. The federal forensic auditors will hear Marcus explicitly separating the real estate embezzlement conducted by my parents from the identity theft orchestrated by my sister. The false narrative is splitting apart, exposing the rotten, parasitic core of my relatives. "I need immunity," Zoe Marcus pleads, leaning closer over the center console. The smell of the liquor is overpowering, turning my stomach. "I will give you Thorne. I will hand over the hidden ledger codes, the offshore routing numbers in the Cayman Islands, and the encrypted client emails. I have a tactical go bag packed in the trunk. I am driving straight to the international airport and booking a cash flight to Atlanta tonight. I have a friend down there who will hide me in a safe house until you secure a deal with the federal prosecutors. I am selling them all out to save myself. Tell the agents I cooperated. Tell them Chloe made me do it." He finishes outlining his cowardly escape plan, staring at me with desperate, wide eyes. The heavy silence returns to the cabin, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers pushing the persistent drizzle away from the glass. I have everything I need. The federal net is already closing around him. but this recording ensures my own freedom is ironclad. Before I can formulate a response, a harsh, metallic click echoes through the quiet interior. The electronic lock on the rear passenger side disengages, overriding the central security panel. The heavy door wrenches open with terrifying sudden force. A blast of freezing Chicago wind and icy rain sweeps into the cabin. The sudden intrusion shatters the claustrophobic sanctuary of the vehicle. Chloe stands on the wet pavement under the yellow glow of the street lamp. She is not wearing her protective designer maternity coat. Her thin silk blouse is soaked, clinging tightly to her shoulders. Rainwater drips from her blonde hair, matting it against her pale face. She holds a glowing smartphone in her right hand. The illuminated screen displays a live global positioning tracking interface. She utilized a specialized marital surveillance application installed secretly on Marcus' phone to follow his exact movements across the city grid. She heard everything. She stood outside the vehicle in the freezing downpour, listening through the cracked window seam as her husband traded her freedom for a plane ticket to Atlanta. Marcus drops his silver flask. The remaining scotch spills across the expensive leather upholstery, staining the pristine material. "Chloe," he stammers, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic register. "Baby, I was just trying to buy us some time to figure this out." Chloe ignores him. The fragile facade of the innocent, expectant mother dissolves into the dark, rainy night. The golden child mask breaks apart, revealing the true, venomous architecture of her personality. She slides into the back seat, slamming the heavy door shut behind her, sealing the three of us inside the dim compartment. She leans forward, slipping her face into the narrow gap between the front headrests. She does not look at the man who just betrayed her to the authorities. Her hollow, dark eyes lock directly onto mine, carrying a sociopathic intensity that goes far beyond simple greed or desperation. "You think you are so clever, Zoe," she hisses, her voice devoid of any human warmth or familiar inflection. It is a chilling, flat, robotic tone. "You think your little corporate spreadsheets and your federal reports make you untouchable." She reaches out and grips the fabric of my tailored blazer. Her manicured nails dig through the wool, pressing painfully into my shoulder. "This is not about the money anymore," she whispers, the cold scent of the rain radiating from her skin. "You ruined my reputation today. You humiliated my father in front of his peers. You are trying to take away the only life I deserve to live. I used your name because you are nothing but a resource. You were born to subsidize my happiness. If you think I will let some anonymous federal agent put me in a concrete cell while you sit in your pristine glass office, you are dead wrong." Chloe tightened her grip on my wool lapel. Her knuckles jutted out white and sharp under the dim dome light of the sport utility vehicle. The rainwater dripping from her hair soaked through my shoulder, but I did not pull away. I wanted her to speak. Every word she uttered was funneling directly into the active microphone concealed in my pocket. "You walked away, Zoe," Chloe began. Her voice lacked the hysterical edge she wielded so effectively at Aunt Beatrice's historic home yesterday. This tone was low, steady, and steeped in a toxic, decades-old resentment. "You packed your bags, went to your prestigious university, and built your sleek, independent life in the city. You left me behind in the suburbs to play the perfect daughter. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain their pristine country club illusion?" I kept my expression neutral, observing the precise shift in her demeanor. The innocent, pregnant sister routine had vanished. Mom required a companion for her charity galas to cover her gambling disappearances. Dad needed a flawless heir to parade in front of his senior law partners. I stayed. I hosted the dinners. I wore the designer clothes they approved. I married the charismatic entrepreneur they handpicked. I built a cage out of their expectations, and I locked myself inside it. She released my lapel, leaning back slightly into the shadows of the rear seat. When Marcus ran the detailing shop into the ground, we faced bankruptcy, total social exile. The country club board would have revoked our membership. My friends would have gossiped about my leased furniture. I looked at your life, Zoe. Your immaculate credit score, your pristine financial footprint, sitting idle while you analyzed corporate risk portfolios all day. You owed me. I viewed your social security number as back pay for the years I spent managing our parents while you escaped. Marcus sat frozen behind the steering wheel. He stared straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield, too terrified to intervene. Chloe continued her confession with chilling pride. It was remarkably easy to become you. The subprime lenders requested secondary biometric verification. They asked for our mother maiden name, our childhood street address in Evanston, and the name of our first golden retriever. You think a bank algorithm can tell the difference between two sisters who shared the same roof for 18 years? I created a shadow email domain, routing the digital verification links directly to my own phone. I forged your electronic signature on the promissory notes while sitting at my kitchen island drinking decaffeinated tea. She laid out the mechanics of the identity theft with the cold precision of a seasoned grifter. She had not acted out of blind panic or momentary weakness. She had researched the lending protocols, bypassed the digital safeguards, and systematically shackled me to $500,000 of toxic debt to preserve her manicured existence. I funneled the approved capital directly into the detailing shop operating accounts. Chloe stated, her eyes fixed on mine. It kept the doors open long enough for Harrison Thorne to recognize a perfect money laundering vehicle. When Thorne offered to inject offshore cash into the business to keep us afloat, I took the deal. I saved this family. You are just collateral damage. The raw, unapologetic entitlement radiating from her was suffocating. She truly believed her curated suburban lifestyle justified destroying my future. I have the offshore routing data and Marcus on tape detailing the fraud. I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. The federal freeze is already active. Your rationalizations will not halt an indictment. Chloe let out a short, hollow laugh. It was a terrifying sound lacking any genuine humor. She placed both hands over her swollen abdomen, resting them gently on the fabric of her damp silk blouse. The corners of her mouth curved upward into a wide, dead-eyed smile. The expression was a grotesque contrast to the maternal gesture. You do not understand the rules of the game we are playing, Chloe whispered. If you do not pull out your phone right now and delete whatever recording you just captured, I will open this car door and throw myself onto the wet pavement. I will hurl myself against the concrete curb until I am bleeding. Then, I will dial emergency services and tell the dispatcher my estranged sister attacked me in a jealous rage, trying to trigger a miscarriage. The threat hung in the confined space, vile and suffocating. The police will arrest you for aggravated assault on a pregnant woman, she continued, her smile unwavering. The prosecutors will bury you. Dad will ensure the local media paints you as a deranged monster who lost her mind over an inheritance. No corporate firm will ever hire you. The federal agents will dismiss your financial reports as the paranoid ramblings of a violent sociopath. Delete the file, Zoe. Hand over your phone or I start screaming. She tightened her grip on the door handle, her body tensing to execute the horrific performance. She expected me to panic. She expected the sheer moral depravity of her threat to force my surrender. A risk analyst assesses the variables and identifies the bluff. Chloe craved comfort, status, and self-preservation above all else. She would never subject herself to severe physical trauma. She was banking on my empathy, a weakness she had exploited since childhood. I did not flinch. I did not reach for my device. I simply reached across the passenger door panel and pressed the electronic window switch. The tinted glass rolled up with a smooth mechanical hum, sealing the interior. Good luck with your performance, I said. I unlatched my door and stepped out into the freezing Chicago rain. The sudden gust of wind whipped my hair across my face, but the biting cold felt like profound relief. I slammed the heavy door shut, trapping them inside their least luxury cage. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw Chloe drop her chilling smile, her face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She screamed something unheard, striking the back of Marcus's seat with her fists. He merely buried his face in his hands. I turned my back on the idling vehicle and walked away down the wet pavement. My stride was even and measured. I did not look over my shoulder. The rain soaked through my tailored suit, but I possessed the singular artifact required to end their reign of terror. The audio file rested securely in my pocket, verified, uploaded, and duplicated to the cloud server during our conversation. I sought refuge under the bright fluorescent canopy of a 24-hour transit station 2 blocks away. The concrete platform was empty, offering a sterile, quiet shelter from the storm. I checked the digital clock illuminated on the large overhead transit display. The red digits shifted. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. The invisible countdown timer ticking in the background of my life hit 0. The mandated 48-hour window triggered by Aunt Beatrice's final codicil had officially concluded. The forensic sweep was finished. The algorithms had compiled their data, analyzing every hidden ledger, every offshore transfer, and every fraudulent subprime loan tied to the Mitchell family name. My smartphone vibrated inside my damp blazer. The screen illuminated, displaying a priority notification alert. I unlocked the device. A formal encrypted email had arrived directly from the administrative server of Harrison Thorne Law Firm. The subject line read, "Final estate resolution. Mandatory attendance required." I tapped the message, opening the brief clinical text. Zoe Mitchell. Be advised that the stipulated financial review period enacted by the late Beatrice Mitchell is now resolved. The final reading of the last will and testament will convene in our primary boardroom at 9 o'clock this morning. Your immediate presence is required to finalize the dispersal of assets. Failure to attend will result in the forfeiture of your designated provisions. Thorne had sent the summons. He and my father still believed they controlled the board. They assumed the federal asset freeze I initiated was merely a temporary bureaucratic glitch or a localized banking error. They trusted the fabricated embezzlement dossier resting on their mahogany table to force my hand. Another notification banner dropped down across my screen. It was a multimedia message originating from a newly created group chat. The participants included Richard, Diane, and Chloe. I opened the text thread. There was no typed message. It was just a single, high-resolution photograph. The image displayed the polished surface of the law firm conference table. Resting in the center of the frame, sitting directly on top of the blank signature line of the quitclaim deed, was the heavy Mont Blanc pen. It was a calculated, silent taunt, a visual manifestation of their arrogance. They were mocking me, demanding I show up to the reading and surrender the last remnants of my independence. They believed I was broken, penniless, locked out of my apartment, and terrified of the fake criminal charges they threatened to unleash. I stared at the photograph of the pen. A cold, ruthless calm settled over my exhausted mind. They wanted me in that boardroom. They wanted to witness my capitulation firsthand. I locked my phone and tucked it back into my pocket. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I stepped out from under the transit canopy, walking back into the rain toward the financial district. It was time to finish the audit. The elevator ascended to the top floor of the law firm. The mechanical hum vibrated through the soles of my damp shoes. The rainwater from the storm had soaked through my charcoal blazer, leaving dark, heavy patches across the wool fabric. I had spent the night awake, running tactical scenarios and ensuring the digital evidence rested securely on the offshore servers. I looked exhausted. I knew my hair was unkempt, and my posture lacked its usual corporate rigidity. I embraced the disheveled appearance. It was the perfect camouflage. My family expected a broken, stranded victim. I intended to give them exactly the aesthetic they desired, right up until the trap snapped shut. The polished stainless steel doors slid apart. The reception area was uncharacteristically quiet. The front desk attendant, a young woman who usually greeted visitors with a bright, rehearsed script, sat frozen behind her monitor. She avoided my gaze, her hands resting rigidly on her keyboard. I did not pause to announce my arrival. I walked straight down the plush, carpeted hallway toward the primary mahogany boardroom. I pushed the heavy double doors open. The scene inside resembled a carefully curated stage play. My father sat at the head of the long conference table, projecting an aura of untouchable authority. Richard had managed to secure a rapid release bond for his trespassing charge overnight, likely utilizing favors from a sympathetic municipal judge he kept in his contacts. He wore a fresh, tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly combed back. The humiliating spectacle of his arrest on my trading floor seemed entirely forgotten, replaced by a renewed, predatory arrogance. Diane sat to his right, swirling a crystal glass of sparkling water. She wore a pristine silk blouse, projecting an image of serene, upper-class boredom. She did not bother looking up when I entered. Chloe occupied the chair across from our mother. The terrifying rain-soaked monster from the midnight street had vanished. My sister was back in uniform, wearing a pale cream maternity dress, her blonde hair styled into soft, elegant waves. She offered me a pitying, condescending smile, acting as though she had not threatened to orchestrate a fraudulent miscarriage just hours prior. Her ability to compartmentalize her own sociopathic behavior was chilling. Marcus sat beside her. Unlike his wife, he could not hide the toll the past 24 hours had extracted. He looked broken. A dark purple contusion swelled along his left jawline, and his lower lip was split, caked with dried blood. The bruising was a stark physical manifestation of his collapsing world. Whether the injuries resulted from a physical altercation with Chloe after I abandoned them in the vehicle, or a hostile encounter with the predatory lenders floating his business, remained unclear. He stared blankly at the polished wood grain of the table, a man who knew he was drowning. Richard leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You look terrible, Zoe," he noted his tone, dripping with mock sympathy. "I assume the frozen bank accounts made securing a hotel room rather difficult. It is a harsh world when you refuse to cooperate with the people who built you." I walked slowly toward the empty chair opposite him. I did not sit down. I rested my hands on the high leather back, keeping my stance grounded. "The audit period has concluded," I stated, my voice dry and raspy from the cold. "It has," Richard agreed, flashing a triumphant grin, "and it found nothing of consequence. Harrison navigated the inquiries with his usual expertise. The third-party accounting firm verified the estate balances and cleared the holdings for probate dispersal. Your aunt was a paranoid old woman who wasted everyone's time with that codicil. The financial sweep is over. We won." He reached across the table, sliding the thick, black, fabricated embezzlement dossier to the side. He treated the blackmail material like a conquered obstacle no longer necessary for the negotiation. He then pushed a single crisp sheet of legal paper toward the center of the wood. "The quitclaim deed. We are willing to be generous." Richard continued, adopting a magnanimous tone. "Sign the assumption of liability today. Accept the business debt under your Social Security number and forfeit your inheritance claims. In exchange, Diane will lift the medical conservatorship restricting your checking accounts. We will destroy the fake email dossier, saving your corporate career. You can walk out of this building and return to your quiet little life. We will never contact you again." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew his signature Mont Blanc pen. He pressed the top mechanism. Click. The sharp, arrogant metallic sound echoed sharply in the quiet boardroom. It was the sound of a predator closing the final latch on a cage. He held the expensive writing instrument out, offering it to me. "Sign your life away, Zoe. Let us move forward." I did not look at the pen. I shifted my gaze toward the end of the table where the architect of their legal shield sat. Harrison Thorne did not look like a victorious lawyer. A man who launders illicit capital through the Cayman Islands should project unshakable confidence. Instead, Thorne possessed a sickly gray pallor. Heavy beads of sweat gathered along his receding hairline, glistening under the recessed lighting. He was staring at his hands, which rested flat against his yellow legal pad. His fingers trembled with a fine, uncontrollable vibration. He refused to look at Richard. He refused to look at me. Harrison, my father, prompted, his triumphant smile faltering slightly at the lawyer's silence. Conclude the meeting. Tell her the legal ramifications if she refuses the offer. Thorne swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing against his tight collar. He did not speak. Instead, he slowly lowered his right hand, sliding it beneath the polished edge of the conference table. He pressed a concealed security button mounted under the wood. A loud, heavy electronic thud reverberated through the boardroom. The sound was deep and final. The magnetic locks on the primary mahogany double doors engaged simultaneously, sealing the entrance. The subtle click of the deadbolts sliding into place signaled a total lockdown. Richard frowned, standing up half an inch from his chair. "Harrison, what are you doing? Unlock the doors. We have a celebratory brunch reservation at 11. Diane lowered her crystal glass, her brow furrowing in confusion. The manufactured serenity began to crack. Marcus closed his eyes, letting his chin drop to his chest. Chloe whipped her head toward the locked entrance, her perfect posture rigid with sudden alarm. The heavy primary doors remained sealed. However, the secondary entrance, a discreet frosted glass door connecting the boardroom directly to the private executive corridor, clicked open. A man stepped through the threshold. He did not look like a junior law partner or a paralegal. He possessed a rigid military bearing, wearing a sharp, unadorned gray suit tailored precisely to conceal the unmistakable bulge of a shoulder holster resting against his ribs. His eyes were cold, analytical, and entirely devoid of sympathy. He surveyed the room with the calculated detachment of a predator stepping into a pen. He reached into his breast pocket, withdrawing a black leather wallet. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his wrist, letting the leather drop to reveal a heavy gold shield embedded inside. "I am Special Agent Vance," he announced. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded the room instantly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Financial Crimes Division." The color drained from my father's face, leaving him looking like a hollow wax figure. Diane dropped her glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending sparkling water and crystal shards scattering across the room. The sharp noise barely registered over the roaring silence that followed the agent introduction. Vance stepped fully into the room, allowing the frosted glass door to shut behind him. "Mr. Mitchell," he addressed my father directly, "you are operating under a severe misconception regarding the nature of the estate audit. Beatrice Mitchell did not hire a private accounting firm to review her ledgers." The federal agent walked slowly around the perimeter of the table, stopping just behind Thorne's trembling chair. 3 years ago, your sister approached the federal authorities with a formalized complaint regarding systemic embezzlement tied to her commercial properties. She agreed to act as a confidential informant. The 48-hour audit stipulation hidden inside her codicil was not a standard financial review. It was an automated federal subpoena trigger. Richard collapsed back into his leather chair, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. "The estate was a honeypot," Vance continued, his voice echoing off the paneled walls. "A legally engineered trap designed to grant the Bureau unrestricted read-only access to every bank account, tax return, and shell company connected to this family, the moment the will entered probate. We have been monitoring the network for 2 days. We watched the funds move. We tracked the offshore routing numbers. We saw the fraudulent subprime loans." Vance turned his cold gaze toward Chloe. The golden child shrank back into her seat, her designer dress suddenly looking like a prison uniform. The family realized the horrifying truth all at once. There was no victory. There was no protective shield. The lawyer they bribed to save them was the very anchor dragging them into the abyss. They had spent the morning gloating, preparing to steal my future, while sitting directly inside a locked federal cage. I looked at my father. His arrogant empire was turning to ash before his eyes. I did not sign the paper. I did not take the pen. I just watched the trap spring shut. The heavy electronic thud of the magnetic locks sealing the mahogany boardroom echoed with finality. Agent Vance stepped fully into the space, allowing the frosted glass door to click shut behind him. He stopped directly behind the leather chair where my estranged father sat, paralyzed. Richard Mitchell Vance said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "You operated under a catastrophic misconception regarding the nature of this estate audit. She initiated contact with the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 years ago." My father slumped backward, his jaw hanging slack. "Your sister approached our field office regarding systemic embezzlement," Vance continued. "The 48-hour audit stipulation hidden inside her codicil was never a standard financial review. It was an automated federal subpoena trigger. The estate itself was a honeypot. It granted the Bureau unrestricted access to every bank account, tax return, and shell company connected to this family." Vance pulled a slim digital tablet from his jacket pocket. "We tracked offshore routing numbers and fraudulent subprime loans. We possessed the historical roadmap, but we required direct physical evidence and a co-conspirator confession to execute a simultaneous takedown." The federal agent turned his cold gaze toward me. "That is where your daughter delivered the decisive blow." Richard whipped his head around to stare at me. Diane froze her hands, trembling violently. "She dismantled your attempt to frame her," Vance explained, tapping the glass screen. "At 6 o'clock this morning, our cyber division received an encrypted data packet routed through an offshore server. The file contained ultra-high-resolution scans of Beatrice's original handwritten shadow ledger. We possess the exact dates, routing numbers, and recipient accounts for every dollar stolen from the commercial plaza. You stole the book," my father choked out, a raspy whisper aimed at me. "You set us up." I remained completely silent. The digital ledger provided the timeline Vance said, but the audio file she forwarded 10 minutes later provided the direct confession required for immediate action. The agent pressed a playback icon. The quiet boardroom filled with the crisp sound of Marcus's voice. The audio captured Marcus desperately offering to trade his wife and father-in-law for immunity, detailing the identity theft and money laundering apparatus Harrison Thorne operated. The recording clicked off. 2 additional federal agents entered, moving with silent, tactical precision, stepping directly behind Marcus. Marcus Avery Vance instructed, "Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Marcus did not argue. The fight had drained out of him entirely. He stood up slowly. The agent grasped his wrists, pulling them backward. The sharp, heavy metallic clink of the steel handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed like a gunshot in the pristine room. That singular sound severed the final fragile thread holding the Mitchell family together. The illusion of their unified, affluent front shattered into a chaotic scramble for individual survival. "It was his idea," Diane shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at her husband. The pristine country club matriarch vanished. Richard orchestrated the entire real estate theft. He needed the money to cover his catastrophic losses. I never signed the wire transfers. He is the architect of the fraud. "Diane, shut your mouth," Richard bellowed, standing up so fast his chair crashed backward. He lunged across the table. "You are confessing to a federal agent, you ignorant fool." The 2 agents immediately intercepted, pushing him back against the wall. Richard watched his own wife volunteer a full verbal confession to the authorities in a desperate bid for leniency. At the mention of the identity theft, Chloe erupted. The golden child sprang from her seat, pointing wildly at her handcuffed husband. "Marcus forced me to do it," she sobbed hysterically. "He said if I did not secure the capital, dangerous people would come after us. I am 6 months pregnant. I am a victim of his financial abuse." Marcus turned to stare at his wife, letting out a bitter, hollow laugh at the breathtaking audacity of her lie. Vance raised a hand, cutting through their mutual betrayals, commanding immediate silence. "Save the dramatic performances for your defense attorneys," Mrs. Avery Vance said, his tone dropping to a sub-zero chill. "Your husband did not force you to bypass the lending security protocols. Our cyber division seized the digital access logs from the subprime commercial lenders an hour ago. We traced the Internet Protocol addresses attached to the forged electronic signatures." Vance stepped closer to Chloe. "The data packets did not originate from the detailing shop routers. They originated from the primary wireless network at your suburban residence. The unique media access control addresses tied to the fraud match the specific smartphone and laptop registered exclusively in your name. You were the sole architect of the identity theft." Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The undeniable technical evidence stripped away her final defense. The golden child sank back into her chair, her manufactured tears replaced by the terrifying realization that her curated life was permanently over. Vance turned his attention to the end of the table. Harrison Thorne remained seated, his head bowed. The corrupt attorney knew the rules of the game better than anyone. He simply waited for the inevitable. Harrison Thorne Vance recited, reading from a prepared document. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and the forgery of legal documents. You have the right to remain silent." The familiar cadences of the Miranda warning filled the room, recited simultaneously by the other agents as they secured Richard, Diane, and Chloe in steel restraints. In less than 10 minutes, the toxic empire my parents spent decades building was reduced to ash. They turned on each other with feral viciousness, proving their affection was merely a transactional currency used to fund their greed. They stood in a row, tightly handcuffed and completely ruined, permanently stripped of their expensive designer armor. I remained standing, perfectly behind the dark leather chair, quietly watching the entire spectacle unfold in absolute silence. 6 months passed. The wheels of the federal justice system operate with a slow, relentless certainty that grinds illusions into dust. The collapse of the Mitchell family was not a swift private affair, but a protracted, highly publicized dismantling. Local Chicago news outlets dedicated entire segments to the unraveling of a prominent North Shore dynasty. Richard lost his license to practice law within weeks. The disciplinary committee stripped his credentials before a federal judge handed down his 84-month sentence. The man who spent decades wielding the judicial system as a personal weapon found himself crushed beneath its rigid mechanics. Diane attempted to negotiate a plea arrangement, citing fragile health and ignorance, but the prosecution presented her extensive casino credit lines and luxury travel receipts. The judge sentenced her to 36 months in a minimum security facility. Marcus delivered his promised cooperation, testifying extensively against Harrison Thorne and his own in-laws. His detailed confession unraveled the offshore Cayman Island networks, but the sheer volume of illicit capital he washed through his detailing business guaranteed him a 5-year term. Chloe faced the harshest reality. She gave birth to a healthy daughter while wearing a global positioning ankle monitor under strict house arrest. The court granted a brief compassionate delay, allowing Marcus' extended relatives in Atlanta to assume custody of the infant before Chloe was remanded to a federal penitentiary. She received a 7-year sentence for orchestrating the identity theft. The government seized their tangible world. The sprawling suburban farmhouse went to auction to satisfy the defrauded subprime lenders. The leased luxury vehicles were impounded. The commercial plaza downtown was absorbed by federal asset forfeiture protocols, liquidating the property to pay restitution. The curated, affluent life they protected so viciously evaporated, leaving behind nothing but court transcripts and empty bank accounts. I experienced this fallout from a quiet, insulated distance. On a crisp Tuesday morning in November, I sat in a vastly different legal environment. The offices of Sterling and Croft occupied the top floor of a sleek glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. There was no dark mahogany paneling or oppressive cologne. The space featured abundant natural light, white marble floors, and an atmosphere of pristine, ethical transparency. David Sterling, an estate attorney known for his unimpeachable integrity, sat across from me. He placed a slim leather folder on his glass desk. The contrast between this man and Harrison Thorne was profound. "Your aunt was an extraordinary strategist, Zoe," he said, his voice steady and respectful. The codicil triggering the forensic audit was only the first layer of her defensive architecture. She knew her commercial plaza was compromised. She anticipated that Richard and Thorne would attempt to force you into signing a quitclaim deed to absorb their liabilities. Sterling opened the folder, revealing a pristine document bearing Beatrice's signature and a fresh probate seal. She included a specific bad actor provision within the foundational trust, he explained. Any beneficiary found guilty of financial crimes against the estate or against another heir would be immediately and permanently disinherited. By orchestrating the identity theft and the real estate embezzlement, your relatives triggered their own exclusion. He turned the page, outlining the final asset dispersal. The commercial plaza was a decoy, Zoe. It was a high-visibility asset meant to occupy their greed while she quietly protected her true legacy. Sterling produced a certified bank statement from an elite offshore financial institution located in Geneva. It was an account entirely insulated from the domestic fraud, untouched by Thorne laundering apparatus, and untainted by the defaulted subprime loans. "Because you refused to sign the quitclaim deed that first afternoon," Sterling continued, "you proved you possessed the analytical fortitude she admired. You survived their extortion without compromising your integrity. You are the sole remaining eligible heir." I looked at the number printed at the bottom of the verified statement. The secure trust held a diversified portfolio of international bonds and liquid capital valued at over $15 million. The money my family tore themselves apart trying to steal was merely a fraction of the wealth Beatrice had hidden away, waiting for the one person she could trust. Sterling reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small velvet pouch. He untied the drawstring and tipped the contents into my open hand. A heavy antique brass key tumbled onto my palm. The cool, textured metal carried the faint, lingering scent of peppermint. It was the master key to the Evanston Victorian home. The physical weight of the object anchored me. It was not just a piece of hardware granting access to a building. It represented the final transfer of power. I closed my fingers around the brass edges, feeling a profound sense of closure settle over my exhausted mind. The following weeks required meticulous administrative labor. Armed with the federal indictments and sworn affidavits from Agent Vance, I systematically dismantled the fraudulent debt anchoring my Social Security number. Working alongside the federal agents provided a unique catharsis. The investigators treated me not as a victim, but as a crucial asset. We spent hours in sterile conference rooms reviewing the complex routing data I had salvaged. With every fraudulent account we closed and every illegal lien we dissolved, I felt another heavy link of the chain snapping. The credit bureaus expunged the subprime loans and the commercial mortgage, restoring my financial profile to its original pristine state. I resigned from my corporate risk analysis position, realizing I no longer needed to sell my expertise to a firm that valued optics over loyalty. I purchased a new smartphone, establishing an unlisted private number. I stood in the bright, sterile aisle of the cellular provider store, dropping my old device into a recycling bin. That singular action severed the final digital tether connecting me to my past. There would be no more manipulative text messages from Diane. There would be no more threatening voicemails from Richard. The toxic noise that defined my entire adult life was silenced permanently. I took possession of the historic property in Evanston just before the first winter snow began to fall. The old house required modernization, but the foundation was impenetrable. I hired a boutique architectural firm to update the kitchen and expand the rear conservatory, ensuring the historic charm remained intact while introducing modern comforts. The quiet domestic routine became my sanctuary. I spent my mornings brewing coffee and restoring the original hardwood floors, and my afternoons reading in the very study where Beatrice had meticulously plotted her final masterpiece. On a quiet Friday evening, I stepped out onto the expansive wraparound porch. The neighborhood was still bathed in the soft glow of antique street lamps. A brisk chill carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing, pulling my wool cardigan tight against my shoulders. I listened to the wind rustling through the bare branches of the ancient oak trees lining the street. There were no raised voices, there were no hidden agendas or looming threats. I stood alone in the dark, breathing in the crisp air. My boundaries were secure, my future belonged entirely to me. My peace was finally and irreversibly secured.